Okay, medieval students, let me say a few more things about Cluny and then I'm going to talk about something else. There were something I left out. So let me pull up this slide again right here. Well, if it's going to work, it's trying to work. Now my screen's going to freeze, so, well, it's working now. All right, you can see it now. So we had talked about the basics here of Cluny. I wanted to emphasize that second point again. There was something that should have told you a little bit more about. That second point where the Cluniac life, yes, and we do use that adjectival form, revolved around long hours of personal and corporate prayer. It was a very regimented prayer cycle in Cluny, and it became more elaborate over time. I asked you the question in the last video: why would people continue to give money to monasteries like Cluny? Well, they did it in exchange for the prayers they received at the altars of Cluny and other monasteries like Cluny. So, and by this time, you had the idea of masses for the dead also. I'll probably say more about purgatory in the future. The idea of purgatory was not well defined at all at this time, or even thought of the way it will be in the 12th and 13th century. But people did have a sense that they owed something for the actual sins they committed, and holy people, like monks, could intercede for them, even in their death. Okay, and it wasn't always really clearly defined, but there's a book about how the concept of purgatory developed called The Birth of Purgatory if you're interested. So you could give money to a place like Cluny. You could, some people gave their kids as monks, right? Or and others gave their daughters to sometimes to convents for the same reason. Also at Cluny specifically, and in other monasteries over time, you had a thing called the Book of Life, and in this book called the Book of Life had the names of donors, and they were part of the confraternity. So think of the word fraternity with con added to it. So a confraternity were the individuals who were really lay people. They never became monks. Really, maybe at the end of their life they might become a monk and be buried there, but their names were in this thing called the Book of Life, and they were constantly prayed for. So that's one of the main reasons why people gave money to monasteries like Cluny. So I'm going to get off of Cluny there, and we're going to talk about something else now. Well, let me pull this document up here. This document is on your blackboard. You can see it there. So when you look at this, you might want to download this document or print it out or something, or go back and look at it after you watch the video. So I'm actually going to talk about only two people here. So Romuald of Ravenna there, and I kind of gave you some basics about him. And don't worry about the middle guy. I should just take him out, but I haven't taken him out of there. The second guy I'm going to talk about here for the next 10 minutes or so will be Peter Damian there. So I'm just going to talk about those two guys. All right, so let me show you these images that are important. So if you go and look at 11th century Italy here, you can see up here in the north and central areas are the areas that were the most significant for what I'm going to be talking about here. So you can see Venice up here, right? You see Milan, the Kingdom of Lombardy here. Tuscany, see Florence right there. Excuse me. My allergies are bothering me a little bit. See Bologna. Now notice Ravenna, where Ravenna is. And Classis, also spelled Classi with an E. Rimini. So these places right here. And Camaldi. See where Camaldi is, okay? So I'm going to be mentioning all these places in here. It's not on here, but also in this area up here was where Fonta Avellana was. I think it's maybe more down this way. So these are all places I'm going to be mentioning. So this is the area we're talking about, all right? So uh, when we're talking about Romuald of Ravenna here, see the dates he lived were uh, on the sheet. You can see it was about 950 or so to 1027. We don't have any writings of Romuald. Pretty much most of what we know about Romuald was actually written by Peter Damian. And Peter Damian wrote the life of Romuald. It's a hagiography. Remember we talked about what hagiography was, saints' lives. He was from Ravenna. He was a nobleman from there. As I said, he entered the monastery there in Classis. That's this city right here. And Saint Apollinarius, he becomes a very devout monk, to the extent that many of the other monks who were there, who were actually not living the best monastic lives, come to see him, become very jealous of him and try to kill him. So he actually flees, excuse me again, he flees the monastery and goes and lives essentially as a hermit after these monks try to kill him. And while he's in living as a hermit, he reads a copy of the Lives of the Fathers. And this is the Egyptian Desert Fathers really inspire him. And remember, the Egyptian Desert Fathers that we talked about before lived as hermits in the Egyptian desert. So at one point, he decides to leave Italy altogether and travels to what today would be, if you want to call it, southern France or northern Spain in the Pyrenees area. Probably more in the Spanish area of the Pyrenees. He stays there a little while and eventually comes back to Italy. When he comes back to Italy, he's actually appointed to be the abbot of his former monastery where he was ran out of town by the Emperor Otto III. I'll mention Otto III in the future in another video. That doesn't work out again, so he did not have good luck at Saint Apollinarius. He leaves Saint Apollinarius again and becomes again a hermit outside in this area. In this area here, okay. Eventually, he kind of gets a group of other men around him who want to live similar lives as hermits, and so he really kind of founds a new way of living. I wouldn't call it an order yet, but he does influence other houses that get founded that want to live similar ways. And they really combine the communal or cenobitical life with the eremitical life. Remember, cenobitical is communal life with the eremitical life. So in this case, these men live together in communities, but they also live in their own individual cells. Okay? And you could also go off by yourself and kind of live as a hermit for a while. And there were a number of these communities founded all throughout northern and central Italy. Okay? A couple of one miracle that's associated with Romuald of Ravenna is actually after his death, a piece of his cloak, a piece of his clothing was buried in a wall in a church, and it drove demons away. So it's really the idea of a relic driving demons away. So let me talk about Peter Damian, and so the rest of this video will be about Peter Damian. Very significant theologian. We have a lot of his writings from this period. It could be argued he was one of the most significant theologians of the Middle Ages, definitely of the 11th century. He promoted this style of monastic life very strongly. He's an interesting guy, a very smart guy. There are some parallels between him and Augustine of Hippo. I don't know if those were literary tropes or just similarities, but there are parallels you're going to see. So he was an orphan. He came from a pretty well-to-do family in Ravenna. It seems that he did not have a happy childhood, and he was a very good student. So he's very interested in the traditional studies of the liberal arts. Remember, we talked about what those were. So he actually becomes, after study, in his, we'll say, early 20s, he becomes a teacher of rhetoric, very similar to Augustine we heard about in the past. and he actually teaches in Parma and Fianza. You can see Parma is up here, in fact. I don't know exactly where Fianza is, but that's all right. So there's Parma there. So he becomes a teacher there. And one day he has an encounter with two monks, two hermits from Fonta Avellana. And that's how you spell Fonta Avellana. And that is where it is. That's what it looks like today, pretty much. Found that picture on the internet. Looks pretty legit to me. So, Fonta Avellana was one of these hermitages that followed Benedict's rule, but came from this tradition started by Romuald of Ravenna. Okay? And he had this amazing conversation with these two monks from there. He was very impressed by them, and it impressed him so much that he decided to join them. So in 1035, he became a hermit, and also not too long after that, himself became a priest. And he continued teaching, but now he would no longer take any payment for it. One of the things he greatly emphasized was the sin of greed and what is called avarice, right? And so he talks a lot about that in his writings. There's a whole book about this concept, really well-known book in medieval studies called Religious Poverty and the Profit Economy in Medieval Europe by a well-known scholar. All medievalists would know who this guy was, Lester Little. So, and he talks about this whole concept, and Peter Damian's one of the people he talks about. So, the idea that money driving people and greed was something especially bad and that had to be dealt with for salvation. So, he becomes a hermit and a priest, I said. He eventually becomes a very significant leader in the monastery at Fonta Avellana, as you see it here. He also goes on to become a cardinal in the Catholic Church, in the Roman Church. I guess they were all the Catholic Church, if you want to look at it that way, but a cardinal associated with the papacy in the 1050s. And I'm going to say more about him in relation to his position in the papal reform movement later. Let me say a couple of more things about his theology. So yes, he opposes simony, and we'll be talking about what simony is. Simony is the buying and selling of church offices. We'll talk about that. Peter Damian was a great promoter of the idea of clerical celibacy. He opposed the marriage of priests strongly, very strongly. He wrote a number of letters. We have, and they've all been translated, 100 and something letters, some of them basically short theological treatises on various topics. One of his most well-known books and studied books is a book called the Book of Gomorrah. That's on the sheet, the Book of Gomorrah. You could probably figure out what the Book of Gomorrah is about. It was written about 1051. In the Book of Gomorrah is his scathing attack on the sinful living. I was going to show you the text there. So here's the stuff on Damian. His scathing attack on the sinful lives of the clergy. And it's very explicit. He goes into great detail about the sexual sins of the clergy and how bad they are. And specifically, he talks quite a bit about the sin of sodomy. One scholar pretty well argued that he actually coined that term sodomy. Again, associated with what were the people of Sodom and Gomorrah practicing, right? And you can figure out what that word means. I don't want to go into any great detail on this video about that, but I think you can figure out kind of where we're going with this, where he was going with it. We have a number of his sermons and letters. I've read a number of his sermons for my own research. He has a couple of really good sermons related to my own research as a medieval historian. He wrote stints of saints' lives, as I said. And one of his big things, again, was to reform the church, you must have clergy who are pure. And he just could not understand the idea of having clergy who were handling the body and blood of Christ, who were performing the sacraments, but were also sexually active, even with their wives. So, that's enough on Peter Damian. Have a good day.